The truth is that like startup life is not balanced. If you want a balanced life, you shouldn't be doing startup. There's no work-life balance.
Do you think founders need therapy by any chance?
Ah,
And when should they?
have you spoken to a founder before? Every founder needs therapy. Um, a lot of the time we provide ourselves our own therapy. So like I have founder friends who just call me to like rant, and just let things out. Because also the truth is that I think there's a market there, for founder therapy, but then it has to be done by someone who has had experience being a founder. So in Africa, you are basically locked in. If you're in Nigeria, you're locked into the Nigerian ecosystem. If you're in Kenya, you're locked into Kenya. If you're in Tanzania, wherever you are in the continent, you're locked into there. But if you look at it closely, we are locked in only when it comes to value. When it comes to conversation, communication, we are not locked in. You on Twitter, you go on every day and you can talk to the world. I learned about crypto from a movie called Dope. The guy bought Bitcoin and he mentioned the technology around Bitcoin. I'm one of those people who watch movies with one hand on Google to Google things that they talk about. From running the gaming guild, the intention was to simplify the process of going from like someone who doesn't know anything about Web3 and then going into playing like Web3 games instead of having to learn how to use exchanges, join Discord, go through like the whole process. We're trying to reduce that flow, and that's how like our first app came into life.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Builders Block. This is a podcast where I sit down with founders, entrepreneurs, and operators building in the African Web3 ecosystem. The goal is simple to document the journeys behind the products that we see today, the wins, the struggles, and the lessons along the way. My hope is that somewhere in this conversation, you find an idea, an insight, or perspective that sticks with you. Now, let's get into it. Thank you so much, Ukeme, for joining me on the podcast today. Yeah. So, our guest today is the founder of PingApp, an all-in-one platform where communication and finance come together. Now, with PingApp, users can message, send money, move crypto, digital commodities, and transact globally all in one place without having to download several applications. It's great to have you here. Now, let's start with the basics, right? In your own words, who are you? What do you do? And what mission are you on?
I think I'm just someone who enjoys building things and solving problems. I subscribe to the idea of solving your own problems first. And by solving your own problem, you basically solve other people's problems. So, about me, before Ping, I was always building stuff, not necessarily in like Silicon Valley sense. Um, Basically, surviving experiments. Um, I grew up in the southern part of Nigeria, so middle class, which basically meant that I had to pay attention to the world I was growing up in. Grew up in an oil and gas state. So the trajectory was finish school and then going to oil and gas. But then in high school, I started having like mini businesses. Started with doing designs on my mobile phones for friends and getting paid for it. And then from designing on my mobile phone, I started like a print on demand t-shirt business. Um, Graduated from that, finished high school. Later went into like photography. I was always drawn to like creating stuff. So creating system, experimenting with ideas. So that has always been something that has moved with me. Yeah, I think that would be like a overview of um, my upbringing.
Oh, interesting. So that speaks to the fact that you're on a mission of like building stuff, creating things that people need in the world, or like what you want to see in the world. You're on a mission of building that and bringing it into existence. Really exciting. So I would like us to go back into like time where, you know, growing up in in the east, sort of like you mentioned in oil region. So I want you to like touch on that. What did that experience give you, right, early on in that environment? Can you tell us like how that has defined you? Just tell us three things that has defined you by growing up in that environment.
I think the first really interesting thing is that you grow up with really intelligent people. So people who basically end up working in oil and gas have like university degrees, mostly engineers. And I was one of those kids who have like adult friends. So I had like deep conversations. Um, I was always reading on stuff that necessarily did not really, you would say, concern me. So like I see like engineering books, I would just start reading it. Which I would say is something that I'm still doing, which is I acquire knowledge based on things I'm fascinated by, not necessarily for a certain social reason. If I'm interested in rockets tomorrow, I'll I just become obsessed with it, and then in like a couple of months, I'm sure I'll be able to be fluent in any questions about rocket. I think that really came from me hanging out with like adults, and for you to be part of that conversation, you need to try and like update yourself on things. So when they are talking about, let's say, like global news, which is you can take it back to the current period we are in. Um, I don't want to just be sitting down there quiet. I want to like contribute. So it forced me to like open my brain, open my mind to like things that are happening in the world, news, innovation. And I think that has really like contributed to who I am today. And maybe a thing that pushed me to end up in the industry I currently am.
Yeah, really interesting. I think hanging out with adults sort of like shaped how you perceive life, and probably like added to like your wisdom. Other than that, now you mentioned you were hanging out with like engineers by any chance. Did you by any chance move on to like study a course around that, say petroleum engineering, or because I also read up about you where you were so interested in computer engineering instead, right? So what sort of like shaped that decision?
Yeah. So the unique thing about um, hanging out with those people is you also get to learn about their current life experience. So as an adult, like I would look at them and I'm like, I don't think I really want to live this life. Not like their life was horrible or anything. They had wonderful life, good pay and all. But the structure of their life, given that I'm someone who I like to explore. I want to learn new things. I don't want to be stuck in like a constant revolving door. So I didn't really was attracted to that. But going back to like where I grew up, that was what almost everybody around me was doing. So you finish college, you go to work in an oil company. So my parents actually also expected that. But at that point, I was already dabbling with computers, and when it was time for me to go to college, at first I didn't really know what I wanted. I was just going for what my parents wanted me to do. So I would like write the Nigerian exams, jam, get the cutoff mark, apply to university based on whatever my parents asked me to pick. And Nigerian school, you don't have like consultants in high school that kind of like talks to you and try to get like a sense of what you would be good at. So I would get application, or get admission, and then I'll like visit the school most of the time, talk to people that are studying that, and then I would realize that no, I don't want to do this. So it became more of like a pattern. Got admission like to over six, same university three times, and then to like other different universities. I wrote jam like twice, sorry, three times. So each of those times, like I would come back and I'll be like, I don't want to. I think at some point my parents got tired, and they were like, "What do you want to do with your life, this boy?" But I think what also gave them some sense of um, confidence in me was that they knew I wasn't like wayward or something. Like if if they come into like my room, they see me like when I started learning how to design, I didn't have enough data for YouTube, so I'll download like PDFs of how to do designs, and I'll be reading that. So I learned how to use Photoshop through like reading PDFs. So when my parents come into the room and they see me doing that, I'm sure it was a bit conflicted in their mind that this boy is not out there doing what we would like him to do, but at the same time, we don't really know what he wants to do. So at some point, I was sure that I wanted to study computer science, and then I informed them. I would like to say my elder sister, who studied medicine, kind of like helped. I did a little bit of house politicking in convincing them to let me go study computer science, and that's how I ended up in school studying computer science. But then I later dropped out because to me, school wasn't like really at my own rhythm. It was slow. I had already acquired a lot of knowledge about what I wanted to do before going into school, and then school was somewhat like taking me back. So at some point, I realized that um, I was learning things outside the classroom, and I was moving way faster than I was doing in the classroom. So I decided to drop out. And it wasn't necessarily that like education, I see education as being like bad, but it was because the parts that I was like looking at, I was required to pay full attention. Um, School didn't lead to that part.
Oh, awesome. That's, a really interesting one, right? From wanting to, study computer science and then finally getting into university and then, dropping out. I'm really curious as to what you think about, school as like a stepping stone, or do you still see school as a stepping stone, or like just go do what you want to do?
Um, I think school is important, but not necessarily for everyone. Like I'm someone who is very big on teaching myself new skills. I think I learn faster than when someone is actually teaching me. It allows me to like explore different paths when trying to learn. Um, Prior before AI is like I usually have multiple tabs on my browser just because like I'm trying to read on something and I see something else, and then it allows me branch into that. So I can basically garner a lot more information than if someone is teaching it to me. If someone is teaching it to me, it's like linear learning. So this is A and we're going to Z, and they just take me there. A lot of the times, people who teach, even in colleges, I'm sure there are lecturers who do amazing job at that, but they're not really focusing on you learning because there are like a lot of people in your class. So everybody has to keep to the same pace. So I think for people who can only learn from other people teaching them, I think school is good for them. But for someone who can actually teach themselves new skill, who have the discipline to sit down and study something on their own without having someone chasing them around, I think not necessarily. And then I also think it depends on what you're actually studying. So there are careers and there are industries where you need certifications, you need proof that you actually went through school. If not that, you won't really have a future in that industry. Then you need to go to college. But then I think one of the amazing thing about like tech space is that nobody really cares about your certificate. It's more about what you're able to do. Um, I had a acquaintance I knew who studied agriculture but was a software developer, and not just a software developer, a really good one at that. So what he studied in university is not what he practiced. He's working for a multinational tech company as we speak. So I think before you decide, which is something we don't really do a lot in our country, before you decide on going to college, you should basically sit down and ask yourself, is this really for me? Um, and then for young people, there's this funny flow of humans in a lot of countries, and Nigeria included, where you just finish. high school, and the next thing you're on like next queue to go into university, you really have no idea why you want to study what you're studying. I remember friends from school who literally went to study something because another friend is studying that, or because they have a relation that is studying that. They don't really have any core interest in it, and that basically affects um, their focus when it comes to studying any of these courses. They don't necessarily focus on learning. They don't necessarily focus on the knowledge anymore. Just focus on just passing through schools. I think when it comes to college, we need to educate the younger ones a lot more, allow them to explore if possible. And I think maybe that is one of the things that really helped me, was that immediately I finished secondary school, I didn't just end up in college. So it allowed me, gave me time to like just sit down, not doing anything like go to school. So had 24 hours of the day. I started exploring my interests. I started reading and thinking about, okay, what future do I really want for myself, which is what a lot of young people don't have the opportunity to do. So I think we need to give young people a little bit more space and allow them to think about their life before they start making the decision of what school they want to go to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it brings me to the next question of where, how did you now, because you've been building quite a number of products, first from like the t-shirt, company, and then moving on, exploring, doing other great stuff. Then how did you stumble on like crypto, and why did you think like I need to go all in on this?
Um, I learned about crypto in 2012 or so. I can't remember the exact year, but it was from a movie called Dope. It was an American MTV show where it's movie for like teens back then, for young people, and then they had used crypto to, can't remember the exact thing they used crypto to, but the guy bought Bitcoin and he mentioned the technology around Bitcoin. I'm one of those people who watch movies with one hand on Google to Google things that they talk about. So immediately they explained the concept of Bitcoin, I just ran to the internet and started like reading about it. I didn't even think I had finished the movie, because the crazy thing about Bitcoin is that it draws you in once you start reading about it. Like, next thing I know, I was just going deep down the rabbit hole. And then I had tried to purchase some Bitcoin, which I wish I did, but was able to. But at that point, we didn't really have a lot of like exchanges. Um, you could only buy Bitcoin from some sketchy websites, not applications, which I wasn't sure. And I'm someone who's very, very paranoid. So I don't click things anyhow on the internet. So at that time, I was like, I'm not sure I want to send my money to this website and hope that they will send me some Bitcoin. So I didn't bother. Fast forward to 2017, a friend of mine um, was talking about it. And I was like, yeah, I've read about Bitcoin. And he later round told me about the price. And I was like, whoa, outside the price, why are we now hearing about it? So he explained to me about like the adoption rate, the number of exchanges that have launched, and that piqued my interest. I was like, if this thing that used to be like one small thing on the internet is now this big, that means there's something more to it. And I can't remember the startup I was working on. Yeah, well, my friend and I were working on a ticketing system for BRT in Lagos, where you can use contactless payment to pay for um, buses. So, in Lagos, you have issues of change when you enter buses. If you're a young person in Lagos, you really understand the struggle of getting change. So we had partnered with like an Indian company, brought in devices, and we were trying to like solve that. And it didn't go through because of the politics of the country. So that's how we like ended up in crypto. My background is in design, so I was still doing like branding gigs, UI and UX geek. Back then, there was no Figma, so you have to do your UI and UX with like Photoshop and Illustrator. And someone who was starting an asset management company for crypto needed help with branding and reached out to me, and I handled that. After having a couple of conversations with the man, he said, asked me to join the team. So I joined the team. My first role was mostly in like handling communication and branding for the company. But because I'm someone who's like, once I get obsessed with something, I just go by. I spent a lot of my time just doing research. So from handling branding and communication and always having conversation with the founder of the company. The guy was like, okay, I should also handle research. The focus was mostly back then on Bitcoin, but I started doing research, and that was like the early ICO wave. So I was doing research on companies from like Binance to not even Ethereum icons. There are a lot of blockchain that had launched back then that I think some of them didn't survive. So from reading those white papers, I got to learn a lot more about how not just Bitcoin, but like the blockchain technology works, the possibilities. Most of those things were speculation because the technology didn't really exist. But the concepts kind of like open your mind to a world that can be possible. And that's like when I got like orange peeled into like the blockchain space. After that, worked with them for a couple of years. The company had a bit of an issue, so I left. Next thing I did, I worked, created a company, had a partnership with an insurance company. We launched one of the biggest like blockchain adoption in Africa with Nigerian Union of Road Transport Workers. So if you're traveling interstate in Nigeria, you know that like when you enter the car, they basically get you to like manually write your name, your next of kin, all this information in a piece of paper. Most people don't know why you do that, but the reason why you do that is that you're supposed to get an insurance in case there's like an accident on the way. Insurance can actually cover for you. But then knowing with anything that basically requires humans to impute data, there is always going to be ways around to work around the system. So sometimes people didn't pay for the insurance, and then after the incident happens, they go back, buy the insurance, and backdate it. So my company solution was basically to um, put those information on chain so that like both the insurance company and the individual who are purchasing it, and also the union, which is the road transport union, who basically was responsible for that, would trust the data that they currently were getting. So we had partnership with Keystone Bank, um, Universal Insurance, Sovanet Healthcare, and the union. We launched the product just before COVID, and we all know what happened when COVID happened. People stopped traveling. So we had synced a couple of money into like building, training people, managers across all the parks in Nigeria, getting like devices that allows them to like take pictures, scan the receipts and upload it. And once you upload it, we basically tokenize it on chain and then give access to all the parties, but the banks, the insurance company, and the union. So there was a single point of truth that nobody could actually doctor, including herself. Um, so after COVID hit, travel kind of like paused, and the project didn't really move. And understanding the country that we come from, you basically have to be the one like pushing everyone to do something. And once you make them stop for like a couple months, reigniting that motion is quite difficult. So after COVID, we had tried to get the project up and running, but there was a change of leadership in the union, and a lot of other factors came into play that um, canceled that dream. Which I think it's something that is quite required, especially for the everyday traveler. It's something that I'm looking at sometime in the future, going back and trying to implement again. But after that, I went back to just building products for insurance companies. So built like software, internal software for insurance company on contract. Build also like consumer product for them because most insurance companies in Nigeria they don't necessarily have like their IT or development team. While doing that, I joined a team online who was building an analytics platform for blockchain. The team was quite decentralized. A couple of people in Brazil, the UK. Um, Someone invited me to the Discord, and the discussion was around building an analytics platform for blockchain. And I was quite interested in what they were doing, but not necessarily at the core because I wasn't that technical at that point about blockchain. But I was also interested in like working in a team that wasn't a company. It was just a group of people building like an open source product. And I've never had experience doing that and also working remote across different time zones. So I offered to help and that's how we started building a product back then called Bird Money. That was later backed by Binance Labs. Um, Built the project. I handled UI and UX, um, which is where my background is. Handled communication and also branding, and I got to like learn a lot about working with teams that like that. While doing that, I think NFTs started picking up, and then I was experimenting with building my own product. My CTO and I started building an NFT marketplace on BNB chain because there was no NFT marketplace back then on BNB chain. And I think about a few days before we launch, Binance launched an NFT marketplace on the BNB chain, which um, was a bummer. We had spoken to a couple of creatives, and our main go-to-market strategy was mostly like corner the market on the chain because the at that point the chain didn't have any NFT marketplace, and also it was more of like an experimental project for us. So we had spoken to a bunch of creators to launch their NFTs and a couple of artists in Nigeria at that point that were interested, or African artists and actors that were interested in launching NFT. And we didn't know that while we're talking to them, Binance was also talking to a couple of those people, which I wouldn't want to call their names. And they basically reached out to us like a couple of hours after Binance launch, reneging on the agreement they had with us, saying they want to go with Binance, which we totally understood because we were just a team of guys building an NFT marketplace, and Binance was an established company. So um, after we left, we stopped building the NFT marketplace. We're still experimenting with different products in this space, and that's when um, gaming, Web3 gaming picked up. And originally, we didn't really think of like starting any company or anything around gaming. The idea was like we had a little bit of liquidity. There are no Africans um, basically participating in the Web3 gaming space. And as we know, Africans, we need to be early in technology for us to really have any footing. So, myself, my co-founders, we started buying NFT, created a Discord, got a manager, and we were giving out NFTs to anyone who was interested in playing Web3 game. And from about 5 people to 10, 20, 30, at some point, people were just inviting their friends. I think we got to like 3,000 members in a very short period of time. And we ran out of NFTs to basically give out to the gamers. And I think at that point, we basically started like seeing how we could time how much one gamer was basically leveraging on NFT to play Web3 games. And had already made some network in the space, and friend of mine who is also a founder in the space got like extra NFTs and then offered it to us, and we gave it to our community. Our community just started growing up, and um, the ecosystem started paying attention. Investors started reaching out, and basically that's how our gaming guild started. And from running the gaming guild, the intention was to simplify the process of going from like coming from someone who doesn't know anything about Web3 and then going into playing like Web3 games instead of having to learn how to use exchanges, join Discord, go through like the whole process. We're trying to reduce that flow. And that's how like our first app um, came into life. The idea was to help alleviate some of those pain for gamers. So with a single application, they can join gaming communities. They can hold their gaming assets back then, which was NFTs. They could hold their gaming tokens. They could convert it with the same app, and then they could also on ramp and off ramp. So being able to buy tokens for the game and also liquidate those gaming tokens to fiat. So that was the original concept.
Yeah, really interesting. I think you went deep into like, how you first were interested from like the movie. And that sounds new to me, right? I mean, most persons share their experience like, oh, maybe somebody told them in church or like somebody, one of their friends. That means you are a very, very curious person, watching a movie and then going like the rabbit hole of saying, oh, what is this thing I need to know? Yeah, so it speaks to the fact of what you've mentioned even earlier before now, how that you've always been curious about stuff. Yeah, really, really interesting. I
It's a
think I'm
blessing
also
and
learning. Sorry,
it's a blessing and a curse.
interesting. Also, that means maybe there are some things that you've been curious about, also that you've gone to learn about, and maybe one way or the other. I mean, knowledge, no knowledge is lost, right? But in
Yeah,
any case, I really want to understand a blessing and a curse. Maybe on the other side, the curse is knowing too much. I mean,
that's part of it. The blessing part is that like I can pick any interest, and I'm confident in myself of like understanding that interest. The cause is that your brain is always looking, it's almost like it's hungry. It's always looking for like new food to eat. So it's always chasing like new knowledge. If you're not consuming or if you're not learning, it feels as if you're not being productive or you're not doing anything. And it's sometimes it's draining because you would want to just take a breather, relax, but then your brain is like, oh, pick a book or something. And then if you have friends that are not like you would basically become the person who like is always curious about like different things. And you're always telling your friends like, do you know that? And then you throw out a random fact. Over time, they get tired of you. So that's like the cost part. Uh,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? So now let's break things down. You've mentioned like various products. At what point did it click for you that you actually want to build like products, right? I know you've mentioned, oh, you and your friend, you guys, started building stuff together from like the insurance part. I just want to like touch on, coming from like the standpoint of like a product designer. um how did you get about that collaboration, right? Do you think we need to collaborate more or we need to compete? So if you were to say like, oh, because you're a product designer and you can just do it on your own other than like collaborating, so my question is, what point did you realize you wanted to build a product, and then at what point do you think collaboration is important?
yeah. So two things. First one is I've always wanted to build products. I was just limited by the know-how. Um, I tried teaching myself coding. Um, strongly like a visual person. Software development is not really my thing. So, and that's one thing about me. I need to have an interest in something for me to like really force myself to learn it. I don't mind sitting in front of my system for the next couple of weeks and it barely, or even sleeping in like my office. But if I don't have interest in it, it becomes a difficulty. So I've always wanted to build things, but then didn't really have the skill set. Luckily for me, I had friends who were like crack dev, and me being a designer, we kind of like complemented each other. So at first, he had his own project, and I had my own project. So it was that is where collaboration really comes into play. And what I would advise people to do is there's that trade you have to do. So I provide my service for you, and you provide your service for me. So for any product he was trying to build, his side project, I basically help him with like the UI and UX. I was like his chief product officer. And then for my own product, I do the designs and then I provide it to him, and he is my software developer. So we complemented each other, which made it easy from outside like professional works that we did together, like our side project. Working with each other over time really improved like our working relationship. So when it was like basically time to start a company, I didn't really know anyone better that I would start a company with.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Better to like collaborate and lean more on your strengths, right? Now let's talk about PingApp, right? Now PingApp, combines messaging, payment services into like a single product. It speaks to me that that's like a super app, right? And so, why are you building a super app in Africa right now, right? Over to you.
Yeah. So the if we look at it, like the internet solved communication and money is still broken. You can basically message someone anywhere on earth instantly, but when it comes to sending money, you basically have to jump across different apps, especially cross-border transaction, and most especially in Africa. Um, most companies and most rail have been building for the most profitable channels, so being outside of Africa and into Africa. Nobody has really been trying to solve the intra-Africa rails, which is being able to send money to Niger, being able to send money to Lesotho or Cape Verde, countries that most people don't know, or being able to send money to Senegal. Right now, if I ask you to name an app that can send money to Tunisia, you probably have no idea. Um, People who are crypto native basically rely on crypto, but then that's a very small percentage of the continent. And if you look at the African continent, we kind of like blocked ourselves based on the borders that were drawn. I always make the statement that we are with PingApp, we are using code to erase borders, because if you look at a country like China, China is about over a billion people, and the fact that they have like apps like WeChat that is adopted across the country makes it easy for commerce across the country. So your market size basically goes from a couple hundred million, a couple million people to over a billion people, basically allowing anybody to scale to whatever size. Also unlocking the ability for people to migrate and move across. I always look at countries like chessboard, allowing them to like move across the chessboard. So in Africa, we are basically locked in. If you're in Nigeria, you're locked into the Nigerian ecosystem. If you're in Kenya, you're locked into Kenya. If you're in Tanzania, wherever you are in the continent, you're locked into there. But if you look at it closely, we are locked in only when it comes to value. When it comes to conversation, communication, we are not locked in. You on Twitter, you go on it every day and you can talk to the world. You can communicate. But value is one of the most important things if you actually want to open up an economy and have like an inclusive economy. And one of the things that hits me, I was watching a YouTube video and I saw someone in Mauritania, deep inside the desert, but they had a smartphone and they were using the internet. And that's how much penetration that smartphones have gotten in the continent of Africa. You see the data set, it's wild. And almost everyone uses the app that wasn't created in Africa, which is WhatsApp. It doesn't really have any incentive to like innovate for the continent. WeChat was made for like China, so they are forced to think outside the box and innovate based on the country that they are in, which is adding commerce, payment, and a bunch of other functionalities. Um, I have a cousin who started a business in. She just finished high school, and she started a business. Um, she sews. She makes female fashion items. And going back to how the internet is global, but capital and value isn't. She set up a TikTok because she's young. She understands how to use the internet, so she was able to like get distribution. And she had people from Egypt, Libya, different other African countries reaching her out to her, interested in purchasing her items in large quantity. But then she reached out to me and she was like, "How can I get money from Egypt? How can I get money from Libya?" My first instinct was crypto, and then it hit me that she has never used crypto. The reason why she never used crypto is that if you're trying to onboard her to crypto now, you need to onboard her to an exchange. And if you think about when you joined the internet, the first thing you used in the internet was not a bank app. It was an email and then a social app. So if social app is the onboarding bridge between someone who is not on the internet, bring that person over to the internet, it could also become the bridge that brings someone from not being on chain to being on chain. Like everybody's phone has a social app, a communication app. So how can you basically improve that user experience? And if you take a lot of your value conversation starts from your communication app, your friend, your family member needs you to send them some money. It starts on like chat. Can you send me this amount? And then you go into like the next steps, which is account number, send it to you, you copy it, and then you have to leave the app which you're having that conversation with and going to press the account. You go through another authentication process from signing in, your two-factor authentication, a lot of loops. But then imagine if you can merge those two flow into one, where you send me a message and, oh, I'm in Kenya, I need to sort this out, not maybe done this or that, and I need $200, I need $100. While we are talking, I can literally just send it to you without you having to leave. And then that basically flattens the landscape. That means someone from Ghana, someone from anywhere, and then that opens up commerce. If I'm selling something, if I'm a young person selling something online, someone in Benin Republic, which is not just far from Lagos, from speaking in the Nigerian context, from Lagos to Akwa Ibom is a lot more further than from Lagos to Benin Republic. But then we are not doing any direct comments like that. And that's a whole huge market sitting there. And then if you're in Akwa Ibom, there's Cameroon just beside. And that's another huge market sitting out there that we are not even looking at. If you're up north, there is Niger Republic, and there's Mali sitting next to you. There's Ghana, there's Burkina Faso. We are not even scratching the surface. I have a friend who is from Lesotho, and she was telling me how difficult it is to get money from Lesotho to South Africa. And if you know Lesotho, you know Lesotho is literally inside, it's surrounded by South Africa. And it's so difficult to move value across those places. I was with her in Kenya, and her mom called her, and because she's the crypto native one, she uses crypto to do that. So she had to basically, in all the way in Kenya, help the mom make payments outside of Lesotho. So just like how we talk about like the train and the railways that was built in Africa, it was not built for Africa to interact with each other. It was built to take resources out of Africa. If you look at our payment gateway and everyone building payments or value chains in the continent, we are not. They are not necessarily building to interact with each other. They are building either out of Africa or into Africa. But for us to unlock the next level for the continent, we basically have to connect the whole continent. And while we're connecting the whole continent, we also connect the continent out to the world. So with one app, you can basically interact with Europe, you can interact with Asia, you can interact with any of the continents or any country of your choice, and at the same time, you can interact with everyone in the continent of Africa. So that kind of shaped the idea and how we started looking at building the app.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? From like the practical example you gave, I think there is like deep um problem into how like we are looking into like intra-continent, right? And there are a lot of like issues trying to. I also remember when I went to like Benin, right? I had to sit right at the border trying to look for how to first exchange my naira to, dollar, and then dollar their own currency. So it was a lot. Imagine if I could just send on my phone directly to the person. I think
Yeah,
it unlocks, the access and also the purchasing power, especially like commerce, right?
yeah,
Really, really interesting. And so it brings me to the next point of where, like, I think Facebook was also trying to solve this, right? Especially with like the Libra and DM
yes,
project, but it sort of like failed, right? And
yeah,
so, why do you think like your team succeeded and like not Facebook at the time?
yeah. So I think it's the different methodology around what we are building. Facebook is different from Ping in the sense, first, the size. Facebook has over a couple billion people. They were trying to issue their own currencies. They basically built their own blockchain. It was a threat to the existing infrastructure. It was a threat to the existing infrastructure. Banks were worried about basically having Facebook to control people's funds. Imagine Facebook managing or providing infrastructure for value. They would be the largest bank in the world in 24 to 48 hours. Um, Countries were basically worried about that. And understanding how multinationals like Facebook and companies like that basically work, um, they would want to own the full stack. And that is literally the highest form of what's the word I'm looking for? Yeah, that's basically going to be like the highest form of monopoly in the world. So that was what worried the regulatory class. But the unique thing about our app is that we are built on a decentralized infrastructure, which is Ethereum, Solana, decentralized chains. And then the currencies that we basically leverage, let's say the stablecoin, are not necessarily issued by us. So you basically get to use stablecoins like USDC, USDT, CNGN, which are all regulated stablecoin issued by other entities. So that platform risk keeps reducing. Um, when it comes to the payment gateway part, we work with local payments across different African countries that are and exchanges that are licensed. So with Kenya, we have our Kenyan partner. With Kenya, we have a Kenya partner. With Ghana, we have a Ghana partner that are regulated in those markets. And there are people who are building in those markets who understand those markets. So we don't necessarily have to do that. So government feels a lot safer knowing they have their hands on the pulse of things. So the way we basically structured our infrastructure and our platform, we structured it in the most decentralized way possible, even down to our communication um, infrastructure. We leverage an open source infrastructure called Matrix. So it's very, very safe, privacy focused, and also something that anyone who wants to audit can actually go and audit. So we looked at and studied why government really went after Facebook, and then we decided to do things in a different way. So you wouldn't in any day wake up one morning. We use self-custodial wallet, for example, for our users. So you can always export your key and move to any other wallet if you wish to. So those were the things we put into place to make sure that we keep ourselves in a safe place. And also we are smaller than Facebook. So I think when we get as big as Facebook, we would cross that bridge at that point.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, right? I think it's more of like the approach, right? Just like you have
Yeah.
mentioned. Moving on, right? You mentioned you originally built Gamic, right? And now the app already like metamorphosed into like PingApp, right? What made you transition from like Gamic to like PingApp? Was it like a pivot or like a completely new vision?
Um, I would say the pivot led. I don't know which came first, if it was the vision or the pivot. Because we the unique thing with gaming is that after the Web3 gaming space started winding down, we noticed that a lot of our users started using the app as a different use case. So it went from being part of a gaming community, having conversation, hosting tournaments with each other, to most user behavior using the communication and the wallet part of the application. So we kind of like borrowed a lot of learning and infrastructure from the gaming app into the Ping app. So people were basically using it. Even I even noticed myself doing that too, like using the gaming app as my default wallet. And then when I'm sending money to like friends who are also on the gaming app, the ease of like just sending it in chat rather than like copying wallet address, going to um, your wallet app, sending the first test transaction to be sure is the correct. Like at some point, using wallet like MetaMask felt really scary to me because I had been so comfortable in like the ecosystem of gaming that I never used to think about wallet address anymore. So that user behavior kind of like nudged us. And then if you think about it, like Africa is the perfect place to build this kind of products because there are like real people here. There are real people actually using the product. There are real people living across borders, like from freelancers, traders, families, um, creators. But the financial system hasn't really caught up. So just seeing our user behavior and how we are using the app, we're like, how interesting would it be if we can actually allow everyone to experience what we are already experiencing? So it basically took us back to okay, how can we re-engineer this for like the everyday person to also experience? It's like when you use going back to like Bitcoin, when you use Bitcoin for the first time and like let's say you have a friend or a family member outside of your country where it took time for you to send. It's like using internet for the first time. When you send money to someone and then in seconds they receive it, your brain can you can never go back to like your original life. And that is literally the same experience with like using gaming is that living for years sending tokens through chat, having conversation in the same place, off ramping like when I was in Kenya for a conference, paying for things directly from the app, like leaving that world and coming back to the current existing world of where other people in like the crypto space currently live. It was a very huge disconnect. So it basically matched. And then I was in Qatar for some time and talking to like taxi drivers, um, the people at the hotel who work there, which a huge percentage of them were immigrants, trying to understand. So how do you get money home? Because the unique thing about us, people immigrants outside of our country is that we always send money home. So the question is, how do you send money home? I spoke to a Pakistani and he was explaining how he basically goes through the process, which a huge percentage of them still have to do it manually. So they get check, take the check, get to the bank. Most time they go to a bureau de change and that person basically helps them do the transaction and they get like crazy charges. So the problem was already there and then we had the solution. So now the connection was how can we provide this solution to these people, and that's where we were like, okay, we need to start working on this immediately.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. And so it's more of both like re-engineering like the whole vision or like the mission of ensuring that payments is seamless, or like cross-border payments is sort of like seamless. That makes a lot of sense, right? Now let's talk about the fact that this is like a super app, right? Where we have messaging, payments, and services. Now let's go into like the architecture, right? What does it actually look like to architect a product like this, where you can both communicate and also like send value? And what are like the other technical and operational challenges?
Um, it's quite a lot because when you look at um, most startup, which is the funny conversation I once had with my CTO. You know how you start something and then you realize that if you knew how difficult it was, you would not do it. Because literally, as we speak, there are companies right now whose single purpose is a communication app. There are companies whose single purpose are wallets. There are companies whose single purpose are just payment services. And then you are basically building the three. So you're building like three different company or product into one, and you need to figure out how each of these would interact with it. So you have like the messaging layer, the payment services part. So it's not just one product; it's a start, um, and you basically have to get all three to work with each other. So we I make jokes that I have a PhD now in like building communication app because we had to with the new app, we had to abandon everything we built from our first app and build everything again from scratch on the communication side, making sure that we had the level of privacy we wanted to have. How do we manage storage, which the best design was basically the industry standard, which is storing data on the user device. So your messages stays on your device. There's no server where your messages basically stays. If you delete, just like how or you can upload it on your cloud and save your backup your messages there. If you delete it, it's basically your choice to do that. So at some point, technically, it basically meant that we had to build system that handled identity, wallet, messaging infrastructure, transaction rails, and also even the service integration part. So, and still at the end of the day, make all of this feel easy to the user, and the user doesn't necessarily have to feel any clunkiness in the app. And the hardest part wasn't or isn't even the technology. It's actually making something complex feel very simple. So the user shouldn't notice the infrastructure. If your user notice the infrastructure, you have failed. And that is like the ideology that drove us. So when you're sending tokens or when you're sending money in chat, you're doing multiple things, but then it's almost like an intense flow, which once you send and you sign the transaction, there's a cascade of actions that happened on behalf of you. Um, so figuring out and the design thinking around that, I think I would say was the most difficult part.
Really, really interesting, because I also like thought about it that this is a lot going on, messaging, payments, and all of that. Big well done, man. And so I was trying to like dig up on like Ping app, and I saw like I came across like one of your tweets which says that you have built Ping app with almost like $1 million, right? Do you mind sharing more on that? Is it because of like the weight of the infrastructure, and that's why you spent $1 million, or do you want to like shed like
Not necessarily how would I put this. Yes. So we know engineers are expensive for a start. And then we are basically trying to do something that would say nobody has really done. That's one. Um, Two, nobody in our continent has really attempted. The only example you could point out was Meta, that is $1 trillion company, was basically trying to build what we're building. The other one that would come to mind would be Telegram, which is worth a couple $1 billion that are also building. And then the third would be WorldCoin, which is also a couple $1 billion company. Um, out of those three companies, we are the only one who is not actually a $1 billion company trying to build the same solution or something better than what they are offering. So basically had to work with some of the best developers in structuring like the architecture. We had a bunch of PhDs from Hong Kong, China, different country as part of the team, basically setting the tone for what we had here. And honestly speaking, that cost a lot of money. But over time, you get to learn through the research and development process. Um, the costs kind of like start getting lower as you're building because the difficult part has already been done. But that doesn't mean that there's not still a lot of money to be spent in bringing the app to exactly where we want it to be.
So that makes a lot of sense. Now, talking about like the money part, so my question revolve around as like a founder of like a super app. How do you think about like revenue? I'm sure like you must have been in talks with like investors and all of those things. How do you deal with like revenue generation? Is it like from first principles or like we're gonna figure it out as we go?
We're going to figure it out as we go. There are already I don't know if I would say industry standard revenue sinks. We've already know exactly how the app generates revenue. We already know exactly. You can we can do easily projections on revenue. But like I mentioned, when you focus too much on that, which when you're building from Africa, a lot of people have to pay attention to revenue, which kind of like limits us to how innovative we can be with products. We kind of had to figure out how to juggle both, build a platform, get the MVP out, something that can generate revenue, but at the same time not doesn't push us away from like the vision of what we are trying to build. So like generating revenue isn't much of a problem, but we see the opportunity to unlock value in markets that currently you cannot do projection for. So, like the Nigeria Benin Republic corridor, what is the term of that market? The Nigeria Cameroon corridor, what is the term? People are not actually looking at those corridors currently because you can't get like a clear data set and project in those markets. It's easy for me to look at existing software or applications, existing company and say, oh, Nigeria does 30 billion every year in remittance from diaspora. So let me try and get a piece of that market. It's easy to do that and say, oh, this is how much Nigeria sends between the US to Nigeria, from the UK to Nigeria, and markets that we have a lot of Nigerians. But then when you're looking at solving problem, there's that problem of Lesotho to South Africa. There's that problem of Tanzania to Kenya. Nobody's really looking at that because they can't do those projection. So for us, it's like a low hanging fruit of let's connect this pipes across this market. And if we connect across a lot of markets, which goes back to like our current way of execution, it lowers the cost a bit for us on doing that. So instead of going to each market and like getting license, going through the regulatory process, which is a lot more costly, working with like partners in those markets reduces the cost and our time to deployment in those markets to almost the bare minimum. So that makes it possible for us to start connecting Nigeria to Benin, to Togo, to Ghana, to Senegal, to Cape Verde, to Mauritania, to Angola, to markets that people did barely actually thought about when it comes to connecting. Because if you're in Nigeria and you travel to some of those countries, any transaction you currently do settles in the US, it settles outside the continent, um, while you're still inside the continent. But then once we connect all those markets, what do we unlock? Airbnb basically started a bed and breakfast company with no existing market for bed and breakfast, but they saw a problem and they were trying to solve it. After they solved that problem, a new market vertical basically opened. It went from people just renting out like their extra room an extra bed to people literally just renting out buildings and refurbishing it just to serve Airbnb customers. So the question is, when you provide communication and payment infrastructure, and you provide APIs for developers to build something on top, you provide access for people to provide commerce service. What do you unlock after you do that? So that's how we're basically looking at it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense because it sort of like unlocks even in my head where like you're building on top of yourself like an ecosystem, right? And I think most like big companies do that, right? You build like the infrastructure for other people to sort of like build on top of you. Now it brings me back to like some of like the principles that sort of like guides your work, right? You mentioned freedom over permission, execution over talk, design with empathy, ownership with community, creativity with conviction, right? These are some of like the principles that guide your work. Do you want to explain or touch on why you think these are important?
Yeah, the principle I talk about is not just like slogan. They come from experience. So freedom over permission basically means building system that doesn't require gatekeeper, and that experience is one of the exciting thing for me. Is that in Web3 or in the blockchain space, you can build a product and you don't need permission from anyone. So I can build something, roll out my smart contract on Ethereum without having to reach out to the Ethereum Foundation. Um, for us who are building from Africa, people underestimate how valuable that access is. If you try to integrate a Stripe, you try to integrate a foreign payment into your platform, or you're trying to build a solution for the world. One of the reasons why it was always difficult for people building from certain countries and continents to scale globally was because of how difficult it was for you to have that access. Not until recently, PayPal had blacklisted Nigeria. And even as we speak, they are not really in the continent. They are partnering with another company to provide the service, which, the being honest, the experience is not still as good as it should be. That is basically locking off over 100 million people. And it's not just one payment gateway. This is about a lot of, if you Google any company, any payment company that claims that they are globally, they have a global footprint. When you Google, you will see that what they usually mean by global footprint is North America, Europe, some Asian countries, maybe Middle East, and then the Oceania region where you have Australia and the rest. There are a ton of countries that they don't provide services for. But guess what? Bitcoin, the blockchain, Ethereum, Solana, whichever of the chain, does not discriminate what country you're from. So that's where the freedom over permission really comes into play. The execution over talk comes from, or I would say means building something that, or shipping something, even when things aren't perfect. So you execute, you show rather than talk about it. Talk about it after you've done it, because everyone knows the quote that says talk is cheap, um, action is expensive. So I focus a lot more on um, building, showing first before talking about what I'm trying to do. And then design with empathy means remembering that the people using your product might be dealing with real life constraints. So slow internet, limited banking access, and also different reality. And which is one of the exciting thing about building from Nigeria. Um, the fact that if you can build for the Nigerian market, your product can scale globally, because you have to design for people from every different class. You have to design with intention for people with every different educational background. So if someone can, the average Nigerian or anyone can use your product in Nigeria, and you can have that product market, then it can scale anyway. You don't basically have to explain. I mean, It compatible with multiple different phone types, both feature phones and premium phones. So building with the empathy and understanding that not everybody is either as privileged as you are, um, which forces us to like prioritize um, rolling out our services on, like, let's say Android over iOS. Because if you look at the number and the data set, Africa is largely um, Android and very little of iOS support. Not just Africa, the majority, global majority market. And the creativity with conviction basically means you should trust your vision, even when the market doesn't immediately understand it. Founders spend a lot of time being like misunderstood, which, honestly speaking, is part of the job. You are the one that has the vision. That means you saw it, or you're the one seeing it. You don't expect everyone to agree with you 100%. Um, and you also have to accept in life that most things are hit or miss. And there are times that you can be very early to an idea, doesn't make necessarily make it a bad idea. So you need to trust your conviction. And if you are very confident in what you're doing and you can double down on it, you go ahead in doing that. But you see people all the time give up on ideas, or give up on things that maybe 2 days more in building it would have changed everything. But then at the same time, uh, being honest is that know when to stop, know when it doesn't work. Um, you cannot be building a product for a market, even with your conviction and with your vision. You need to know when to stop. Sometimes it's not just the right time. Going back to the statement of you couldn't be too early. Sometimes there are things that unlock the ability for a product to work. I would not be trying to build PingApp 5 years ago. The only reason why I'm building it today is because the infrastructure that enables this already exists. From the blockchain being um, the blockchain being not just as widely adopted as it is, also as improved as it is compared to like in 2017. The fees on Ethereum now is almost close to nothing. Solana exists and it's really fast. Stablecoin exists. Imagine trying to build Ping without stablecoins, and not just stablecoin exists. You now see localized stablecoins like CNGN, ZAR, um, different stablecoins across different countries, and every day exists. So it makes life a lot more easy. There are a lot more blockchain dedicated payment gateways across the countries. Countries are also providing licenses to these parties to legally do business, which make the user experience as easy as possible. So all these things is like connecting the dots. So um, I think it was Mark Zuckerberg that said that you cannot connect the dot looking forward. You can only connect the dot looking backward. Um, the dots are basically aligning and allowing us to connect it right now, which is why we are attempting to build the product well right now.
Yeah, thank you very much, for going deep into, when you mentioned it's not like just a quote, but like from real world experience. I think the essence of like this podcast is for people to like learn from, you know, founders' journey, particularly like yours, where all of what you've mentioned, I'm sure somebody's right out there, also going through the same thing and can also like resonate with like this experience. Now, one that I would like to also want you to touch on is the concept I've also been exploring in recent time. You mentioned that collective wealth is real wealth. I want you to like sort of like explain that. Um, does it mean like bringing people together, or like you and your friends coming together to sort of like bring your intellectual wealth and then do stuff, or what does that actually mean?
Um, Collective wealth is real wealth is a statement that has multiple interpretation, but what I usually refer to that is that if you enable people to become wealthy, you can literally become wealthy from that. So one of the being from Nigeria is such a privilege. It allows you to experience and observe things that a lot of people don't have the opportunity to do. Also, it's things that happen outside of Nigeria, so let me not make it too unique to Nigeria market. But Nigeria has a very unique nature of, if you pay attention to companies who actually get scale and are succeeding, they are companies who help other people solve not just problem but also increase their wealth. So if you look at the payment companies, let's say example like MoneyPoint, is making payments easy and real time for merchants. So now those merchants can basically do two, three, four times the transaction volume they were able to do before without having to worry about managing cash and the security around that. Um, if you look at Paystack, enabled e-commerce platform to be able to receive payment. If you look at a lot of the companies that succeed in this space, OPay, for example, providing POS to merchants who help people get access to cash. The people who are doing that as a business, some of them that actually provides a lifeline for them. So they are generating revenue from that. And not just generating revenue, you're generating wealth for them. And in return, the company gets to benefit. So if you figure out, or not just figure out, if you can generate wealth for your users, in return you would get part of like the kickback from that wealth. And the wealthier your user base, the more you can scale. If your user base become poorer, that means you become poorer. Your market size basically shrinks. So you have to optimize for what value can I provide to my users to allow them scale whatever value um, you can provide um, them. So that's where like community wealth comes into play. Bitcoin has similar model to that as Bitcoin network social graph grows, the value grows, and then the individuals who actually um, have, let's say, early access to it, their wealth also grows. If you look at Ethereum, some of the biggest investors in the Ethereum ecosystem are people who got into Ethereum early. So they became wealthy. And what do they do next? They invest in the ecosystem that they understand, and the ecosystem that provided them with the opportunity to get access to that wealth. So it becomes like a network effect that grows over time. You can say the same about internet. The early internet entrepreneurs, from the Jeff Bezos to the Bill Gates, the internet helped them get wealthy. People who used their solution became wealthy from providing internet service. In return, they reinvested into that ecosystem. So it's like a flywheel of wealth, and that basically grew the internet market, or yes, the internet market to where it is right now, where you have an Nvidia that is over a I think $2 trillion company. So if you focus on extracting value away from your user, then it's not community wealth. But then if you focus on how you can provide services that increase the value for your user, and then that's when you're doing it right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's more of like the network effect, right? Afterwards, where like you're not trying to first extract, but you're, providing value from the onset, which goes back to, why you're sort of like building PingApp, because you see like the effect of how, cross-border settlement and payments can, really, really scale things. And then maybe later on, you know, revenue sources can come from there. Really, really interesting. Yeah, let's also talk about health, right? Recently or like some late last year, you mentioned how that the doctor asked you to like rest, and I'm kind of like curious how like I know like you're a creative person, always wanting to like, prefer solution in the world. And probably like you got so carried away in all of that pursuit. What's like your take to like other founders, because you've experienced this firsthand, how you think about health, rest, and also recovery while building? And to also mention, based on the type of person that you are, um, the fact that being curious is also a cause where like if you're not reading, you're like, oh, I'm not doing anything, and which sort of like pulls you back into that loop of wanting to do stuff. Now, how do you, break through from that?
Mm. The truth is that like startup life is not balanced. If you want a balanced life, you shouldn't be doing startup. There's no work-life balance, and there are also seasons where the company basically consumes almost everything about you, like your time. You literally don't have any time for yourself. Um, but I've over time I've basically learned that if you burn out completely, you stop being useful to the mission and what you're trying to build. So I try to think about like sustainability, not just like productivity. So I sleep when possible, in as even though that I'm not getting as much sleep as I would like. But then there's a huge improvement from a couple of years back. I try as much as possible to spend time with family because that basically helps you reset. It gives you like it's like fresh air to you. Um, Also, you have to play the long game because the long game matters more than a sprint. Sprint is short, burst, and then you get tired. But the long game, if you can sustain your breathing, sustain how you manage your energy, you can go a lot further than um, you would go with a sprint. So I focus a lot more now on how can not necessarily have a work-life balance because I know based on where I'm right now, I don't have the luxury of that. But I try as much as possible to see how I can get a little bit of fresh because especially in our industry, things move so fast. You can easily just get drawn into like the cycle of things just happening. So every single day you're bombarded with information. There's a new breakthrough, there's a new innovation, and you're trying to see how can you improve your efficiency using AI to automate your workflow. A bunch of those things, keeping up with what's happening, and with the way things are going, you would never or you can never really keep up 100% on things that are happening. And you can always 100% not innovate every single day. So you try and see, okay, create that models. How can you make things sustainable for yourself? Um, Pick a day to rest. If it's on Sunday, if you have to have friends that are founders in the space, one of a founder in the space that gave me like I'll call it the alpha. He doesn't pick calls on Sunday. If I call him though, he picks because we are friends outside of work. But he doesn't pick calls on Sundays. On Sunday, he just tunes out of every single thing, and that allows him to like refresh his brain and refresh his mind. That by Monday or by Sunday night, he's basically just setting up for the next day. And then by Monday, he comes in fresh. But there are people who are working all through the weekend. And then by Monday, they're already tired. So they're not coming in with as much fresh energy as they would do. So I try as much as possible to like manage. I hate reading books. I like reading digital books. Um, Never really, like I mentioned, I learned my design reading PDFs on my system. That was like how I learned how to use Photoshop. Read on PDF, then try it out. I didn't have enough data to be watching YouTube back then, uh, so and data was expensive. So I got accustomed to like reading digital content than actually physical books. But then I kind of forced myself to start reading physical books because it helps you stay away from the screen. Because my life is literally around the screen, and that has been somewhat quite helpful in managing like not burning out and the sustainability.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now it brings me to like to the next question of like not burning out, right? Where do you think founders need therapy by any chance?
Ah,
And when should they?
have you spoken to a founder before? Every founder needs therapy. Um, a lot of the time we provide ourselves our own therapy. So like I have founder friends who just call me to like rant and just let things out. Because also the truth is that I think there's a market there for founder therapy, but then it has to be done by someone who has had experience being a founder. Because most people would not understand what you're trying to explain. Um, a I- I've never been to a professional therapist, so I wouldn't really know. But I think like most of the times you have problems that you need someone who has had experience or who has dealt with such problem to give you feedback. And I think having network of people who you can trust, who also have probably been where you are heading, really helps. So I would say people who I talk to who have done or have past where I currently am in my journey. And then I get to talk to them. I get to get feedback from them. I get to get advice from them. And the truth is, like, everybody in the stack have their own problem. So even the people at the top have their own problem. So if you just put founders in a room and allow them vent, they will just continue venting about what they are going through. But I think there's a market there for whoever is able to unlock that.
Yeah, that's interesting because from what you said, it got me thinking where like sometimes even like not just founders, for people who are just going through like the normal daily Nigerian struggle or whatever, people who want to talk, and I'm bringing it to the concept of like founders who are trying to solve users' problem, trying to innovate and just do great stuff. And so I'm thinking founders also should like go for therapy because trust me, like I think it's going to really really help. And on the point of logging off, I think it's also something that everybody out there or like as a founder should also like do. And I trust that everybody watching this will also learn from that. You should be able to like pick a day and totally log off, not picking somebody's call or not picking like whatsoever score for like a day which would not ought, right, because it helps you to like reinvent yourself. And you talking on like reinvent yourself, right? We know that as founders or like as builders, sometimes you have like global opportunity, and because of like the nature of things, and now they'll say like geography is destiny, right? Do you believe where you live shapes your opportunity as a founder, and reinventing yourself to getting like a second passport, right? Do you think is a good move?
So I'll start with the global perspective part too. Like geography definitely geography absolutely shapes opportunity. Um where you grow up determines the problem you see first. I think throughout this conversation I've pointed out how being a Nigerian has actually shaped a lot of thought process and my experience, how it has influenced building. Growing up in Africa basically exposes you to like systems that don't always work smoothly. So from payment to infrastructure to access to capital, but that has also means that you see opportunities that others might miss. So the constraints can basically sharpen your creativity, allows you to do more with less. Going back to like looking at the people building what we are building, they are like company that are a lot more capitalized than us, but we are able to execute at a certain percentage at the level of what they are executing. They have a communication app, we have a communication app. They have a self-custodial wallet integrated. We have that. Um, they have a payment service. We have that. Almost everything they ship, we are able to ship. But then their burn rate and our burn rate is nothing the same. So that constraint kind of like sharpen that scarcity helps sharpen your mindset and how you try to solve problem. You can even see that in like the AI space with like DeepSeek. Lack of access to NVIDIA chips basically pushes them to come up with new, unique direction to how to train models and basically innovate. So some of the most interesting companies of the next decade will basically come from founders building outside like the traditional center of power, which is like Silicon Valley or the rest. But with that saying, going to your second point about having like a second passport, Um, Having to experience what I've experienced from traveling, it's quite valuable. Um, Going for example, going for like Ethereum conference in Thailand, basically having to do drug tests, um, having to get police reports, having to get a bunch of things that like another of our friend who came from like the Middle East got his visa in 24 hours of him applying online. Didn't have to go to the embassy, didn't have to submit their passports. You can see the gap between that, having someone call you in and wanting you to be in Silicon Valley in 48 hours, and you knowing that when you apply for visa, it comes likely might come like in the next 2 months or so. It changes the dynamic. So I always advise, if you have the opportunity to have anything that gives you a favorable advantage, you should basically leverage it. So if it is a second passport that allows you to be able to travel to as many countries as possible, that unlocks things for you, then by no means should you think too long about the decision.
Yeah, right. That makes a lot of sense. The first time I went to like Singapore, I saw how people, I mean, during like the stopover, I saw how, little kids were traveling and how they were holding like their passports and how they didn't have to, you know, go about trying to worry about, you know, applying for different visas. Most of them are like, on arrival, or they don't even have to apply at all, right?
Yeah.
So it sort of like kicked like something in my head. And the fact that I've also seen like other founders, even in Nigeria, they have like an opportunity, and then they're tagging people on X where like, oh, can you get me through to like the consular general of this embassy or whatever. It's I mean, for the most part, it's sort of like hiring and sort of like limits, the
Yeah.
access. But yeah, like you mentioned, if you can, do invest and reinvent yourself. Um, so yeah, it brings me to like the next question of going back to business. What do you think is one thing that makes someone a great entrepreneur? You know, with like your background and the various things that you've built.
From my experience, I would say instinct. Um, Instinct. I've always had this conversation around if being an entrepreneur is something you can learn or you're born with. I've not really come to a conclusion on which is which or which is true. But the one thing I can say for a fact is that you need to have instinct to know when to act and when not to act, um, what to do and what not to do. Instinct drive a huge percentage of that, and I think some can be learned over time, but then I can't still tell which one comes natural. Um, but I would say instinct is the most important thing. Um, where I would say you could learn is, yes, even if you have the instinct, um, naturally, with you would say like in the jungle, every animal has different instincts. Um, and how the size of their perception. A spider's instinct is way different from another animal or insect instinct. So also advisable to try and pick up from like listening to other entrepreneurs, um, learning, hearing the story of when they acted and when they didn't act. Um, Over time, it's like boxing. It's like practicing. You can practice from, you know how they say learn from other people's mistakes. You can learn from other people's mistakes, and that helps you avoid making those mistakes. And then you can actually, outside avoiding, practice things that helped make someone else succeed, that it becomes muscle memory for you. So I think, yeah, instinct is something I would say you should pay a huge attention to. Evaluate your instincts. If possible, at the end of the day, sit down and evaluate your decision making. Why did you do this? Why didn't you do this? And then track your decision making process, improve on it. Over time, you would, it's like a blade, you would basically sharpen it to a point where um, you would be acting at a speed that even, it's like muscle memory at that point. Even you wouldn't be able to explain why you did what you did, but you just know that there's an instinct, and that instinct is based on like years and the foundation of data set that you've put together.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Which brings me to like the last question, and I'll connect it back to instinct, right? And before we go into like the break the pod or break the block session, which is what has been like your hardest time at Ping, right? And what did your instinct come up with to sort of like solve that problem?
Hmm. Hardest time. Should I say every day has been the hardest time at Ping? Building Ping hasn't been like the easiest. We've been on hard mode from like day one, um, with all the constraints that exist from building from Africa, building from Nigeria, and also having like a big dream of what you're trying to do. Um, and also, if we're just being honest, building like startup is hard anyway in the world. Um, Building one while juggling like real life is another one entirely. So there was moments where I was trying to basically keep the company alive while also dealing with like personal pressure, um, raising capital, um, managing the responsibility of your team because you know have people depending and looking up to you. The stakes are always basically different, but they were basically weeks where like everything that would break, either for a good reason or a bad reason. Good reason is that there's something happening and there's a ton of users just coming online at the same time, and then your server is down, you're increasing capacity, but then it's not still enough. There are a ton of things that want to happen. Um, One of the hardest that I can remember was I was in Kenya for Magma program, and we had a partnership with Linear Protocol um, for a campaign. And a day before the campaign started, one of our provider, our RPC provider, just deleted Linear chain from their services. So this is like less than 24 hours, less than 12 hours, because this was already almost midnight to the campaign starting. And we know Linear by Joseph Lubin of Consensus is a huge brand. So we're expecting thousands of people to participate. And that's how we woke up. That night, we basically have to like ship a new app build to the App Store, figure out like walk through around how can we provide this service. One of the tasks was for users to swap tokens on our platform. So it was almost like an educational process where you download our app, you use features on our app to learn how the app basically works, introductions to our app. And one of the tasks was to swap token on our platform, and the RPC provider was off. So that means we cannot basically support the swap anymore on our on swap. So we basically had to like um, iframe another swap into our own app by a partner. Luckily for me, the CEO was in Kenya too, so we sat with her that night till like 3 a.m. Thanks to our Dodo CEO of Dodo. Um, did that integration, woke up the next morning, users started coming in. First, there was complaint about some things, and you know, things are always going to break. While fixing that, the traffic started increasing. At some point, we had like over 300,000 people online at the same time, sending messages and trying to do something at the same time. And which as a founder is a good problem to have. You get to experience how your product work at scale. So server, we basically run our own server. We don't use like AWS or GCP because those guys would basically kill you with bills. So we basically have to manually start adding like extra servers. And as we are adding server, the app comes back on, users come back, flood back in, and then like in less than a few minutes, we exceed the load and some users don't have access to the app anymore. So it was just a continuous process of like fighting with trying to keep the app up. And being honest, users don't care how you're keeping things up. You just need to keep things up. So, and we totally understand that. So we were trying as much as possible to um, give our users and the users the best experience possible. But the happiest part is that, in as much as that was like the hardest day in building our company, it was actually also like an amazing experience to have, because it helped us notice a lot of things on the infrastructure that we didn't think. And um, there's a saying that you should move fast, break things. You should ship your first product. But it was something my CTO used to say to me. And like I said, my background is not in software development, it's in product design. And also, as a CEO and an entrepreneur, you're forced to make some certain decision. But whenever you make some technical decision, you might always come back to pay that debt. And we got to experience that. And that is one of the things that pushed us to, when we pivoted from gaming to ping, we had to build everything from scratch. And this time we said that we are not going to rush. We are going to make sure we build it with the best practice. Every single thing needs to go through processes to make sure that we don't experience what we experienced before. And also, we can provide our user with the best solution and user experience possible.
Yeah, thank you so much, for that. That was like in depth, and I'm sure like your instincts must have, provided like a solution, especially like the one with linear, where you had to like quickly call a friend, and fortunately she was like on board at the time. Really, really interesting. So we're sort of like come to the end of like the podcast, but before we like wrap up, I have like this break the block session where I'm going to be asking you like two questions,
So,
and it's basically like no overthinking, and you just straight answer. If you had like abundant capital today, which African Web3 startup or products would you invest in and why?
Paycrest,
Okay, interesting. And why?
they are building a solution that is quite very valuable to the continent, and not just the continent, the globe. Um, we are in an ecosystem which we value decentralization. We value censorship resistant. We value users being able to participate in system and networks. And what Paycrest is actually building ticks every single box. Um, if Paycrest is able to scale across the African continent, they basically have solved payment infrastructure for the whole continent. I think I would say the same thing about Hyperbridge with the their bridging system. It's the first truly decentralized bridge in the world, not a multi-sig bridge like most bridges in the ecosystem are. So that would be another company I would invest in. And I think if I'm to mention a third one, it would be Block Radar.
Okay, really, really interesting. So that means like there are quite a number of like interesting and innovative
Oh,
products coming out of Africa. And
there's so many that if I have infinite capital, I'll be writing checks every day.
yeah, right. And that's why, we are doing this podcast such that we can, talk to the founders and sort of like get, their journey and share with other people who are also like imagining building, innovative stuff. Um, so the last question, which is like, what's one unpopular opinion you have about crypto?
That people have lost their ways. The industry has lost its way, and people have lost their
Ah,
way. Yeah.
interesting. How do you
I
mean?
think I think a lot of people have forgotten like the ethos and the philosophy that led to the development of the technology,
Mm.
which basically goes back to one of the my principle, which is freedom over permission. Um, the purpose of crypto was to level the playing field for everyone in the world, giving everybody the same access. Um, Bitcoin doesn't have a company, doesn't have a head office, it doesn't have someone you have to talk to do an integration with. Same with Ethereum. I would say I'll have to give it to Vitalik. Vitalik is working very hard and fighting very hard to keep that ethos going. But if we're being honest, a huge percentage of the world is a capitalist society. So capitalists are going to capitalists. Um, but I think there are better ways we can design economy. We shouldn't just do copy and paste of the ecosystem or the world that we have been singing and talking about replacing. Um, if we are basically just a replication of the current existing world, then there is no value of spending the last couple of years building all the technologies that we've been building.
I think that's controversial, right? The fact that we've lost as an industry, the ethos or like our way. Uh, yeah, I think you know we also have like a lot of. Okay, so this boils down to the fact of where like we've seen like a lot of like institutions coming into play and a lot of like TradFi guys coming into play, and it looks as if what we were actually preaching against, now we are sort of like embracing, all of that. And I think it's just a phase, sort of. And yeah, other than that, I think we're going to see in the next few months how it pans out.
I think to add to that, we basically made concession just to have them to come into the ecosystem when
Mm.
we are actually the ones, the innovators. If you look historically, the innovators usually are not the ones that make concession for the status quo. It's usually the status quo that makes concession for innovation. But then being positive is hoping that over time the status quo will adopt the principles of the innovators, which is opening up system. Um, yeah,
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that beautiful insight. And so I've come to the end of like the podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today, and sharing your journey and insights as a founder. I trust that people watching this would have, gotten a particular insight or like a remarkable lesson for them to pick up and work with. And so, if this conversation made you curious about what Ukeme and the team are building, be sure to follow him on X and check out PingApp. And if you found this conversation valuable, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel for more conversations as this. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.